What's up, YouTube? Today, I got a breaking report. Breaking report, y'all. And it's due to the radiological hazard warning that was recently announced in Georgia on June 20th, and also in Alabama and Florida, in parts of Alabama and Florida. And this article states residents throughout the southern east were startled Thursday morning by an alert of a radiological hazard warning in Georgia. The Georgia Emergency Management Agency said the alerts, which came through on phones, radios, and televisions around 7 a.m., were part of a test. You may have received a test emergency alert this morning regarding a radiological emergency in Georgia. We regularly test our emergency alert system, to ensure they are working properly, and this was only a test, which is in fact not a test, because if it's actually going on in the background that people are unaware of, this is not a test. This is something that's actually going down that they are hiding from you guys. But we're going to dive right into it, because this is no test. This is real life. But before we dive into that, I want to go into a little bit of history of the Bikini Atolls. Here on Bikini Atoll, and it states a short history of the people of Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll is one of the 29 atolls and 5 islands that compose the Marshall Islands. These atolls of the Marshalls are scattered over 357,000 square miles of a lonely part of the world located north of the equator in the Pacific Ocean. Further in the report, in the early 1900s, the Japanese began to administer the Marshall Islands. This domination later resulted in a military buildup throughout the island in anticipation of World War II. Bikini and the rest of the peaceful, low-lying coral atolls in the Marshalls suddenly became strategic. The Bikini Islanders' life of harmony drew to an abrupt close when the Japanese decided to build and maintain a watchtower on their island to guard against an American invasion on the Marshalls. Throughout the conflict, the Bikini Station served as an outpost for the Japanese military, headquarters in the Marshall Islands of Kwajalein Atoll. In February of 1944, towards the end of the war, in a gruesome and terrifying bloody battle, the Americans forced captured Kwajalein Atoll and thereby effectively crushed the Japanese hold on the Marshall Islands. After the war, in December of 1945, President Harry S. Truman issued a directive to Army and Naval officials that joint testing of the nuclear weapons would be necessary to determine the effects of the atomic bomb on American warships. Bikini, because of its location away from regular air and sea routes, was chosen to be new nuclear providing grounds for the United States government. In February of 1946, Kadamar Ben H. Watt, the military governor of the Marshalls, traveled to Bikini on a Sunday after church, he assembled the Bikinians to ask if they would be willing to leave their atoll temporarily so that the United States could begin testing atomic bombs for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. King Judah, then the leader of the Bikinian people, stood up after much confused and sorrowful deliberation amongst his people and announced, we will be believing that everything is in the hands of God. While the 167 Bikinians were getting ready for their exodus, preparation for the U.S. nuclear testing program advanced rapidly. Some 242 naval ships, 156 aircraft, 25,000 radiation recording devices, and Navy's 5,400 experimental rats, goats, and pigs soon to begin to arrive for the tests. The nuclear legacy of the Bikinians began in March of 1946 when they were first removed from their island in preparation for Operation Crossroads. The history of the Bikinian people from that day has been a story of their struggle to understand scientific concepts as they relate to their islands, as well as the day-to-day problems of finding food, raising families, and maintaining their culture amidst the progression of events set in motion by the Cold War that would have been for the most part out of their control. In preparation for the Operation Crossroads, the Bikinians were sent 125 miles eastward across the ocean on the U.S. Navy LST landing craft of Roderick Atoll. The islands of Roderick Atoll were uninhabited because traditionally the Marshallese people considered them to be unlivable due to their size. Roderick is one sixth the size of Bikini Atoll, and because they had an inadequate water and food supply, there was also a deep-rooted traditional belief that the atoll was inhabited by evil spirits. The administration left the Bikinians food stores sufficient only for several weeks. The two atomic bomb blasts of Operation Crossroads were both about the size of the nuclear bomb dropped on Japan. 18 tons of cinematography equipment and more than half of the world's supplies of motion picture film were on hand to record the Able and Baker detonations, and also the movement of the Bikinians from their atoll. From December of 1946 through January of 1947, the food shortages worsened on Roderick. The small population of Bikinians was confronted with near starvation. During the same period of time, the area of Micronesia was designated as the United Nations Strategic Trust Territory (TT) to be administered by the United States. Indeed, it was the only strategic trust ever created by the United Nations. In this agreement, the U.S. committed itself to the United Nations directive to promote the economic advancement and self-sufficiency of the inhabitants, and to end shall protect the inhabitants against the loss of their lands and resources. The people of the Bikinians have long seen the irony in the conduct of the TT agreement that allowed the bombing of their homeland and that forced them into starvation on the Roderick Atoll. In May of 1947, to make the Bikini situation on Roderick even more serious, a huge fire damaged many of the coconut trees. By July, when a medical officer from the U.S. visited the island, the Bikinian people were found to be suffering severely from malnutrition, A team of U.S. investigators determined in the fall, after a visit to Roderick, that the islands had to be adequate supplies of food and water that the Bikinian people should be moved from Roderick without delay. The U.S. Navy has harshly criticized in the world press for neglecting the Bikini people on the Roderick. Harold Ickes, a reporter, stated in his 1947 syndicated column, Man to Man, that the natives are actually and literally starving to death. Immediately, preparations began for the transfer of the Bikinians to Ugualing atoll in the Western Marshall. In November, a handful of young Bikinian men traveled to Ugualing, and with the help of Navy Seabees, they began to arrange a community area and to construct housing at the end of the year. However, the U.S. selected Etoile atoll as a second nuclear weapon test site. The Navy then decided it would be easier to move the Inuit people to the Ugualing, despite the fact that the Bikinians had built all the housing and held high bones there. In November of 1948, after 6 months on the Kohanji Atoll, the 184 Bikinians set sail once again. This time, the destination was Kili Island, their third community relocation in 2 years. Starvation also troubled the Bikinians on Kili. The situation led the Trust Territory Administration to donate 40-foot ships to be used for copra transportation between Kili and Julut Atoll. Later in 1951, the boat was washed into the Kili Reef by heavy surf and sunk while carrying a full load of copra. In the following years, rough seas and infrequent visits by the field trip ships caused food supplies to run critically low many times on the island, and once even required an airdrop of the emergency food ration. While the islanders struggled to set up their new community on Kili, the beautiful atoll of Bikini was in the process of being irradiated in the Northern Marshall in January of 1954. The Air Force and Army men arrived on the Bikinians' former temporary home of Roderick Atoll and jointly set up a weather station to monitor conditions in preparation for Operation Castle. This was a series of tests that would include the first air deliverable and the most powerful hydrogen bomb ever designated by the United States. Indeed, according to a Defense Nuclear Agency report on the Bravo blast, the weather briefing the day before the detonation stated that there would be no significant fallout for the populated Marshall. The briefing at 6 p.m., however, stated that the prediction winds were less favorable. Nevertheless, the decision to shoot was reaffirmed. But with another review of the winds scheduled for midnight, the midnight briefing indicates less favorable winds at 10,000 to 25,000 feet levels. Winds at 20,000 feet were headed for right at Rongelap to the east, and it was recognized that both Bikini and Enemy Islands would probably be contaminated. The decision to go forward with the test, knowing that the winds were blowing in the direction of the inhabited atolls, were essentially a decision to irradiate the northern Marshall Islands, and moreover to irradiate the people who were still living on them. This is crazy, what they did to the people. Early in the morning on March 1st, 1954, the hydrogen bomb, codenamed Bravo, was detonated on the surface of the reef in the northern western corner of Bikini Atoll. The area was illuminated by a huge and expanding flash of blinding light. a raging fireball of intense heat that measured into the millions of degrees shot skyward at a rate of 300 miles an hour. Within minutes, the monstrous cloud, filled with nuclear debris, shot up more than 20 miles and generated winds a hundred of miles per hour. This fiery gust blasted the surrounding islands and stripped the branches of coconut from the trees. Joint Task Force ships, which were stationed about 40 miles east and south of Bikini in positions, enabled them to monitor the test. Detective the eastward movement of the radioactive cloud from the 15 megaton blast. They recorded a steady increase in radiation level that became so high that all men were ordered below decks and all hatches and watertight doors were sealed. Millions of tons of sand, coral, plant, and sea life from the Bikini Reef from from three from three islands and the surrounding lagoon waters were sent high into the air by the blast. That was a, that was a big bomb. The Rundaleeps, not understanding what was happening, watched as two sun rose that morning, observed with amazement as the radioactive dust soon formed a layer on their islands 2 inches deep, turning the drinking water a brackish yellow. Children played in the fallout. Their mothers watched in horror as night came and they began to show physical signs of exposure to the they to show physical signs of exposure. The people experienced severe vomiting and diarrhea. Their hair began to fall out. Sound familiar? The islands fell into a state of terrific panic. The people had received no explanation or warning whatsoever from the United States government. 2 days after the test, the people of Rongelap were finally taken to Kwanjin for medical treatment. On Bikini Atoll, the radiation level increased dramatically, and in late March following the Bravo test, the off-limit zones were expanded to include the inhabited atolls of Roderick, Utrecht, Uglang, and Zipi. It is started to note that none of these islanders were evacuated prior to this blast or even before subsequent nuclear weapons tests. So they just blast away without even warning the people that, hey, we gonna do it, or even taking the people out. It's crazy. In the spring of 1954, Bakar, Angelini, Roglab, and Roderick were all contaminated by the Yankee and Union weapons test which was detonated on Bikini Atoll. They yielded the equivalent of 6.9 and 13.5 megatons. What an explosion. Typhoon Lola struck Kili late in 1957, causing extensive damage to crops and sinking the Bikinian supply ship. Shortly afterwards, in 1958, Typhoon Ophelia caused widespread destruction on Jalit and all the other southern atolls. The Bikinians lived on Jalit moved back to Kili because the satellite community became uninhabitable due to the typhoon damage. The Bikinians continued to fight the problem associated with the inadequate food supplies throughout the 1960s. The difficulty of inhabiting Kili is due in part to the small amount of food which can be grown there, but more so because it has no lagoon. Kili differs subsequently from Bikini because it has only a single island of 1/3 of the square mile in land area with no lagoon, compared to the Bikini's homeland of 23 islands that form a calm lagoon and have a land area of 3.4 square miles. From Most of the year, Kili is surrounded by 10 to 20-foot waves that deny the islanders of the opportunity to fish and sail their canoe. So why would you move these people there knowing that? Crazy. After a short time of Kili, a place that the islanders believed was once an ancient burial ground for kings and therefore overwrought with spiritual influence, they began to refer to it as a prison island because the land does not produce enough local food for the Bikinians to eat. Crazy, man. This is actually what they're doing to the people and don't care. In 1967, U.S. government agencies began considering possibility of returning the Bikinian people to their homeland based on data of radiation level on Bikini Atoll from the U.S. scientific community. This scientific optimism stemmed directly from an Atomic Energy Commission study that stated well water could be used safely by the natives upon their return to Bikini. It appears that radioactivity in the drinking water may be ignored from a radiological safety standpoint. The exposure of radiation that would result from the reparations of the Bikinian people do not offer a significant threat to their health and safety. But accordingly, in June of 1968, the story appeared on the front page of the New York Times. President Lyndon B. Johnson promised the 540 Bikinians living on Kili and other islands that they would be able to return to their homeland. The president also stated that it is our goal to assist the people of Bikini to build on these once desolated islands a new and model community. He then ordered Bikini to be resettled with all possible dispatch. Told him it was good. It's alright, y'all good. Y'all can go ahead and settle back. Knowing that it wasn't. In August of 1969, an 8-year plan was prepared for the resettlement of Bikini Atoll in order to give the crops planted on the islands a chance to mature. The first section of the plan involved the clearing of the radioactivity debris on Bikini Island. This segment of the work was designed by the AEC and the U.S. Department of Defense. Responsibility for the second phase of the reclamation, which included the replanting of the atoll, construction of a housing development, and relocation of the community, was assumed by the U.S. Trust Territory Government. By late in the year of 1969, the first cleanup phase was completed. The AEC, in an effort to assure the islanders that their cleanup efforts were successful, issued a statement that said there's virtually no radiation left and we can find no discernible efforts on either plant or animal life. In late 1972, the planting of the coconut trees was finally completed. During this period, it was discovered that as the coconut crab grew older on Bikini Island, that they ate their sawed off shells. Those shells contained high levels of radiation. Hence, the AEC announced that the crabs were still radioactive and could be eaten only in limited numbers. What a shame. The conflict information on the radiological contamination of Bikini supplied by the AEC caused the Bikini Council to vote not to return to Bikini at the time, previously scheduled by American officials. The council, however, stated that it would not prevent individuals from making independent decisions to return. Three extended Bikinian families, their desire to return to Bikini began being great enough to outweigh the alleged radiological dangers, moved back to Bikini Island and into the newly constructed cement houses. They were accompanied by approximately 50 Marshallese workers who were involved in the construction and maintenance of the building. The population of the islanders on Bikini slowly increased over the years until June of 1975, during a regular monitoring of Bikini, radiological tests discovered higher levels of radioactivity than originally thought. But they told the people that it was okay to come. U.S. Department of Interior officials stated that Bikini appeared to be hotter or questionable as to safety, and an additional report pointed out that some water wells on Bikini Island were also too contaminated with radioactivity for drinking. A couple of months later, the AEC, on review of the scientists' data, decided that the local food grown on Bikini Island, pandanus, breadfruit, and coconut crabs, were also too radioactive for human consumption. Medical tests of urine samples from the 100 people living on Bikini detected the presence of low levels of plutonium 239 and 240. Robert Connor of Brookhaven Laboratories committed that these readings are probably not radiologically significant. In October of 1975, after contemplating these new terrifying and confusing reports on the radiological conditions of their atoll, the Bikinians filed a lawsuit in the U.S. federal court demanding that a complete scientific survey of Bikini and the Northern Marshes be conducted. The lawsuit stated that the U.S. had used highly sophisticated and technical radiation detection equipment at Etoile Atoll, but had refused to employ it at Bikini. Crazy. So you mess the people up and then refuse to help them, treat them. What a shame. The Bikinians, unaware of the severity of the radiological danger, remained on their contaminated islands. While waiting for the radiological survey to be conducted, further discoveries of these radiological dangers were made in May of 1977. The levels of radioactivity strontium-90 in the well water of Bikini Island was found to exceed the U.S. maximum allowed limit. A month later, a Department of Energy study stated that all living patterns involving Bikini Island exceed federal radiation guidelines for 30-year population doses. Oh my God. Later in the same year, a group of U.S. scientists, while on Bikini, recorded an 11-fold increase in cesium-137. Body burdens of the more than 100 people residing on the island. Alarmed by these numbers, the DOE told the people living on Bikini to eat only one coconut per day and began to ship in food for consumption. If it's already radioactive, why are you going to tell them to even eat any of it at the high levels that they are contaminated at? It's not good at all, not even one. In April of 1978, medical examinations performed by U.S. Physicians revealed radiation levels in many of the now 139 people on Bikini to be well above U.S. maximum permissible level. The very next month, U.S. Interior Department officials described the 75% increase in radioactive cesium 137 as incredible. As incredible. That is crazy. I want to take you guys into this quick video clip of actually how it was back then in the 1940s and 50s.
Have you ever dreamed of living an idyllic existence under the waving coconut palms of a remote South Sea island? Of course you have. For ever since the onerous burden of civilization first began pressing its crown of thorns on the brow of romantic mankind. Who has not wistfully envisioned a trip across the languorous Pacific to find a tiny, lovely, lost coral island, to abandon forever the rigors of organized society, to loaf and sleep and fish and swim lazily, peacefully, and happily on the bounty of a glorious tropical nature? Well, here we are on the morning of February 3rd, 1946, on this far-off Pacific paradise over 4,000 miles from San Francisco. Is that remote enough for you? It's less than 600 acres in area. Is that tiny enough for you? There are only 167 human beings here, 60 of them children, all deeply religious Christians, converted by adventurous New England missionaries generations ago. From the coconut palms, the pandanus, and breadfruit trees, they get food and the material for their dwellings, of which there are only 26. They depend on their own arts and crafts. They are proudly self-sufficient. They are astonishingly intelligent. They are a gentle and lovable people. They have boats, quaint outrigger canoes made of small pieces of strange woods, lashed together with fiber. Yes, life is simple and beautiful on Bikini Atoll, until today, February 3rd, 1946, when there enters into Bikini Lagoon a fateful thing, a grim, huge symbol of civilization in its most terrifying form. Arriving is Commodore Ben H. Wyatt, United States Navy, with a startling request. Will the people of Bikini abandon their paradise so that the United States can use it for a certain experiment with the fantastic, the incredible thing called the atomic bomb? And after long conferences, it is to King Judah in public meeting that Commodore Wyatt puts the direct question.
All right, now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to attempt to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind, and that these experiments here at Bikini are the first step in that direction? Now then, James, they have heard our plan. Will you ask King Judah now to get up and to speak here for his people?
We will glad to go, and everything good, and everything in God's hands.
Tell him that's fine. Everything being in God's hands, it must be good.
Now Commodore Wyatt must look for another island, an uninhabited island, with sufficient resources to give the people of Bikini a new home, near enough and yet far enough away to be safe. He finds it in Rangerik, slightly smaller than Bikini and some 175 miles to the northeast. And on February 20th, 1946, the work begins of preparing Rangerik for the reception of a whole people. And so back to Bikini to dynamite the coral reefs and make a channel for the huge LST to land. But while these 167 simple and unselfish human beings begin tearing up their modest households by the very roots, let's ask why. Why these people of all people must sacrifice their ancient heritage, their proud traditions, even their sacred burial ground to the march of science. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. When the Joint Army and Navy Chiefs of Staff decided to determine the effects of the atomic bomb upon the structural strength of ships and to discover the reaction of aircraft to atomic attack, necessarily at a spot distant from the world centers of population, They chose tiny remote Bikini because of its excellent anchorage and because of its complete geographic isolation. The very nature of Bikini's minute place on the face of our vast and troubled planet will enable the Joint Army-Navy Task Force to obtain the maximum information in these tests. Out of that horrifying instant when this quiet, peaceful atoll is transformed into a hellish, roaring blast of ghastly power will come lessons that may determine the basic facts of atomic warfare, the future design of ships and aircraft, and the development of defensive measures should atomic warfare ever be used against the United States. And far more than this. For, concealed within the fiery terror that is the atomic bomb, are hidden the broader and nobler aspects of its mystery, the power for good rather than evil, the ability to save, not destroy mankind, to build him a whole new world of atomic
Now, we're going to dive right in on the conversation. And the conversation reads, Bikini Islanders still deal with fallout of U.S. nuclear tests more than 70 years later. In the summer of 1946, Bikini was all over the news. It's the name of a small atoll, a circular group of coral islands within the remote mid-Pacific island chain called the Marshall Islands. The United States had assumed control of the former Japanese territory after the end of World War II. Just a few months earlier, the United States soon came up with some very big plans for the little atoll of Bikini, after forcing the 167 residents to relocate to another atoll. They started to prepare Bikini as an atomic bomb test site. 2 test bombings scheduled for that summer were intended to be very visible demonstrations of the United States' nearly acquired nuclear might. Media coverage of the happening at the Bikini was extensive. The public interest ran very high. Who could have foreseen that even now, 70 years later, the Marshall Islanders would still be suffering the aftershocks from the nuclear bomb testing on Bikini Atoll? The 2 subsequent tests were extended to allow comparison of air-designated versus underwater designation. Atomic bombs in terms of destructive power to warship. The very future of naval warship in the event of the atomic bomb was in the balance. Many assumed the test would clearly show that naval ships were no obsolete and that air forces represented the future of global warfare. The subsequent underwater bomb designation didn't go as well either. It unexpectedly produced a spray of highly radioactive water that extensively contaminated everything it landed on. Naval inspectors couldn't even run the area to assist ships damage because of the threat of deadly radiation doses from the bomb fallout. The radioactivity produced by the explosion, all 4 bomb testing were canceled until the military could evaluate what had gone wrong and come up with another testing strategy. The United States did not, however, abandon Little Bikini. It had even bigger plans with bigger bombs in mind. Ultimately, there would be 28 Bikini test bombings spread over the 12 years. Comparing different bomb sites before the United States finally moved nuclear bomb testing to another location, leaving Bikini to recover as best as it could. What a shame they did to these people, leaving them to thrive as the best they could. On March 1st, 1954, the bomb detonated just as planned, but still there were a couple of problems. The bomb turned out to be 1,100 times larger than the Hiroshima bomb rather than the expected 450 times. And the depravedly westerly winds turned out to be stronger than meteorologists had predicted. The results: widespread fallout, contamination to islands hundreds of miles downwind from the test site, and consequently high radiation exposure to the Marshall Islanders who lived on them. 3 days after the detonation of the bomb, radioactive dust had settled on the ground of downwind islands to depths of a half an inch. Natives from badly contaminated islands were evacuated to Quahagen, an upward uncontaminated atoll that was home to a large U.S. military base. Residents of the Rongelap Atoll, Bikini's downwind neighbor, received particularly high radiation doses. They had burns on their skins and depressed blood count. Islanders from other atolls did not receive doses high enough to induce such symptoms. However, as I explained in my book, Strange Glow, The Story of Radiation, even those who didn't have any radiation sickness at the time received doses high enough to put them at increased cancer risk, particularly for thyroid cancer and leukemia. What happened to the Marshall Islanders next? In a sad story of their constant relocation from island to island, trying to avoid the radioactivity that lingered for decades, over the years following testing, the Marshall Islanders living on the fallout contaminated islands ended up breathing, observing, drinking, and eating considerable amounts of radioactivity. In the 1960s, cancer started to appear among the islanders for almost 50 years. The United States government studied their health and provided medical care, but then government study ended in 1998, and the islanders were expected to find their own medical care and submit their radiation-related health bills to a nuclear claims tribunal in order to collect compensation. That is out of control. That is out of control. Same thing how they do to the black people. Experiment with them with the Tuskegee, experiment with the syphilis. Give it to them and don't even give them the treatment. Go let them spread it on out. Crazy what the United States government be doing. By 2009, the Nuclear Claims Tribunal, funded by Congress and overseen by Marshall Island judges to pay compensation for radiation related to health and property claims, exhausted its allocated funds with U.S. $45.8 million in personal injury claims. That ain't nothing. Still owed the victims now. At the present, about half of the valid claim have died waiting on their compensation. Congress showed no inclination to replenish the empty fund, so it's unlikely the remaining survivors will ever see their money. And that's messed up. They literally waiting on the people to die so they don't have to pay. Like they owe black people 4 acres and a mule. They ain't giving it to her. They rather us die out than to give it to her. That is crazy and unjust. Continuing in the article. But if the Marshall Islanders cannot get financial compensation, perhaps they can still win a moral victory. They hope to force the United States and 8 other nuclear weapon states into keeping another broken promise. This one made VIA the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. This international agreement between 191 sovereign nations entered into force in 1970 and was renewed indefinitely in 1995. It aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and work toward disarmament. In 2014, the Marshall Islands claimed that the non-nuclear armed nations, China, Britain, France, India, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, and the United States have not fulfilled their treaty obligation. And that's always been. That's all the hundreds of treaties that they made with the Indians, and they broke every last one of them. Sound familiar? That's how they do. I'm telling you, if you don't wake up and realize for yourself and worry about yourself and what's going on around you, the government sure not gonna do it for you. They not even gonna report on it. This is why most of the people that lives in these areas with all these contaminated nuclear plant areas don't even know the major risk that they have. The Marshall Islanders are seeking legal action in the United Nations International Court of Justice in The Hague. They have asked the court to require these countries to take substantive action towards nuclear disarmament. But will they? Nah. Nah. Because they do not care whatsoever. Point blank period. They do not care. So no, they ain't gonna feel none of the obligation. So that's why we must see it for ourselves for what it is and act on it. Which brings me over here to theguardian.com. Quite odd. Coral and fish thrive on Bikini Atoll 70 years after nuclear test. Now, in the United Nations report in 2012 said the effects on radiation were long-lasting. Special reporters claim Callan in a report to the UN Human Rights Council said near irreversible environmental contamination had led to the loss of livelihoods, and many people continue to experience indefinite displacement. The water cannot be drunk because of the continued contamination. The seafood cannot be eaten, and the plants cannot be formed because of the contaminated soil. More than half of the 167 original inhabitants of Bikini Atoll have now died, and many went to their graves still longing to return to their homeland. If they ain't, because it's too contaminated. Too contaminated. Now, according to a paper by Timothy J. Jorgensen, associate professor of the radiation medical at Georgetown University, former residents of Bikini Atoll started showing cancer related to radiation exposure in the 1960s. So you can't say that they didn't get it from what they was doing, because here you got one who was there. Or had people that was there and know that it was the cancer, it was the radiation and stuff that caused these cancer. Those downwind of the explosion had burns and depressed blood clots. Those on island further afield show an elevated risk for cancer, particularly thyroid cancer and leukemia, and have been involved in a protracted compensation claim with the United States for decades. What happened to the Marshall Islanders next is a sad story of their constant relocation from island to island, trying to avoid the radioactivity that lingered for decades, writes Jorgensen. Over the years following the testing, Marshall Islanders living on the fallout contaminated island ended up breathing, observing, drinking, and eating considerable amounts of radiation. It's crazy. That is crazy, man, what they doing to these people without regard of humanity, life. It's crazy. Now, we're going to go into what the UN had to say about the situation. And here, bring us here on the United Nations, the United News. UN expert warns of situation faced by Marshall Islands citizens affected by nuclear tests. And it states, a durable solution has yet to be found to the displacement of the communities affected by the nuclear testing more than 60 years ago in the Marshall Islands, a United Nations independent expert warned today. I have listened to the concerns and stories of the affected communities from Bikini, Etuak, Rongelap, and Utwik. As a result of the nuclear testing, all these communities have suffered dislocation in one form or another from their indigenous ways of life, said the special reporter on human rights obligations related to environmental sound management and disposal of hazardous substances and waste, Colin Gurrow. From 1946 to 158, some 67 nuclear weapons tests were carried out in the Marshall Islands, which were then administered by the United States under the trusteeship arrangements with the UN. Independent experts on special reporters are appointed by the Human Rights Council to examine and report back on a country's situation or a specific human rights theme. The positions are honorary and the experts are not United Nations staff, nor are they paid for their work. Mr. Guerrero, who was finished the first fact-finding mission to the Marshall Islands by special reporters, said many communities feel like nomads in their own country, and many have suffered long-term health effects. The expert underlined the need for strategic and long-term measures to tackle the consequences of the nuclear testing program to ensure sustainable progress and cope with the specific challenges posed by the climate change in the country. He urged the government of the Marshall Islands, the United States, and the international community to find effective ways to readdress the situation for those affected. The affected communities are searching for solutions, but are yet to feel that they have been restored in a position that is any way equivalent to the life the life that they and their families lived before this dislocation. Mr. Grill said, each of the communities from these affected atolls has a unique history in relation to nuclear testing, and each needs its own solution. Mr. Guerrero stressed that education will be key for the long-term survival of the country, as there will be increasing need to sustainably preserve the culture and environmental heritage of the country, including the Bikini Atolls, which has been declared a World Heritage Site by the UN, Educational Science and Culture Organization. During his four-day mission, Mr. Guerrero met with President Christopher J. Luack, as well as with government representatives, ministers, senators, high-level officials, experts, academics, civil society, local communities, and members of the press, and nothing ain't happened yet. To let you know that they do not care. Actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words. Which leads me over here to the conversation. I'm sorry. Leads the conversation over here at magazine.scienceconnected.org. And it reads, Marshall's Island radiation still too high decades later. In the years immediately following the end of World War II, the United States government conducted a large-scale testing of nuclear weapons on a small group of islands in the remote Pacific Ocean March 1st, 1954. The largest nuclear device ever tested by the United States was designated at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Casa Bravo, as the bomb was known, created a mushroom cloud of radiation almost 4.5 miles wide. This was more than 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The size of the bomb, combined with a strong easterly wind and a delay in evacuations, caused exposure to radioactive fallouts that led to serious health problems and birth defects for the island's residents. Just to show even more that they don't care. They didn't even warn the people or even evacuated them before they started testing. They left them as a guinea pig. The Marshall Islands have experienced rapid population growth since the 1960s. Many of the nation's residents live on only two crowded islands, unable to return to their home islands because of the contamination. According to the U.S. Embassy, the radiation levels in the Marshall Islands have been steadily declining due to cleanup efforts and the passage of time. See that? However, a new study from Columbia University suggests that islands in the Etoile and the Bikini Atolls have much higher levels of radiation than previously thought, and still may not be safe for humans. That is crazy. That is crazy. But what became of the residents of Bikini? Here on Interesting Engineering. In 1946, when the 167 residents of Bikini Atoll agreed to leave their home, they never expected that their exile would be permanent. In 1946, Bikini Atoll was a tropical paradise situated in the middle of nowhere, about halfway between the Hawaiian Islands and the Philippines. It was a part of the Marshall Islands, which included 33 other tiny dots in the Pacific Ocean. Bikini named the bird not from the bathing suit, but from the Marshallese language, and translated to surface of coconut, comprised of tiny islands and shaped like a skinny donut with a large hole in the middle. In 1946, Bikini had 167 inhabitants who eked out a living by growing native crops and fishing for shellfish and fish in the sea. The natives were all also skilled boat builders and navigators who sailed their two-hulled proa to and from other islands. There was a society-based close extended family and tradition. Then Navy Commander Ben H. Watt, who was the military governor of the Marshall Islands, made an appeal to the Bikinians. He told them that their land was needed for the good of mankind and to end all world wars, which was a flat-out lie. Not understanding what was about to happen, the islanders thought that they would soon be able to return to their home, and they agreed to be moved. The Bikinians' King Judah said, "We will go," believing that everything is in the hands of God. U.S. Navy Seabees helped the islanders disassemble their church and community houses and transported them to the islands of 125 miles eastward of the uninhabited Roderick Atoll, which was 1/6 of the size of Bikini Atoll. The Navy left them with a few weeks of food and water. and the Bikinians set about planting new crops and fish, but on Roderick their crops produced far less food than they had on Bikini, and there were far fewer fish in the water. By early 1948, the islanders were on the verge of starvation. Once again, a team of U.S. investigation concluded that they must be moved immediately, and the significant columnist Harold Ide wrote, "The natives are actually and literally starving to death." Crazy. Again, the islanders were uprooted, this time to the islands of Quahagen, about 200 miles southeast of Bikini, but Quahagen was less than a hospital place. It had been the scene of most concentrated bombardment of the Pacific War. Starting on January 31st, 1944, over 36,000 shells from American Navy ships, ground artillery, and B-24 Liberator bombers had rained down on the islands, killing many of the 8,000 Japanese troops stationed there, and as well as the residents too. When the Bikinians got to the Kohaji, they were housed in the tents next to the concrete runways being used by the U.S. Navy. After 6 months, the Bikinians chose to move to Kili Island, 400 miles south of Bikini, and one of the smallest islands in the Marshall Islands, at 1/6 the size of Bikini. Kili lacked the calm, protected lagoon that Bikini had, and it did not provide enough food for the transplanted residents. In 1968, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission began clearing radioactive debris from Bikini Island and replanting coconut trees. And the AEC determined that the coconut crabs on the island retained high levels of radioactivity and could not be eaten. By 1970, the U.S. allowed 160 Bikini Islanders to return to Bikini, but by 1978, tests revealed an 11-fold increase of cesium-137 within their bodies, along with elevated levels of plutonium-239, plutonium-240, and strontium-90. Women were experiencing miscarriages, stillbirth, and genetic abnormalities in their children. This promoted the U.S. to evacuate them once again, this time to Majuro Atoll, 600 miles from Bikini. In 1975, the Bikinians filed a class action lawsuit against the U.S., which resulted in a payment of $75 million in damages and the creation of the $90 million trust fund to pay for medical expenses, cleanup, and to give each islander about $550 per year. As of February 2013, there were 4,880 Bikini Islanders, 1,250 living on Kili, 2,150 on Majuro, 280 on Egypt, and 350 on the other Marshall Islands, and 850 in the United States and other countries. Today, on Bikini, 4 to 6 people live there as caretakers, including Edward Madison, who has lived there since 1985. He is a descendant of one of the original residents who was relocated in 1946. Madison does soil monitoring for the U.S. Department of Energy and is the dive master of Bikini Atoll diver. As for Bikini Atoll, its 3 of its islands, Bahokajan, Arikala, and Namu, were completely vaporized by the nuclear blast and disappeared. That's crazy. Now they knocking places off the map. They really knocking them off the map. Three communities vanished after the blast. That is crazy. That is crazy. Now that leads me to here on the areas that had revealed this radiological hazard warning test, which in fact is not a test when it's actually happening in the background. So this just let me know that they know and they don't care about this conspiracy that's going on, which leads me right to the concern you and a scientist. Florida and Georgia nuclear power project too risky and costly. Florida and Georgia residents should be asking what's in it for us when it comes to proposed construction of a new or expanded nuclear power plants in their states. According to a new study, they probably won't be happy with the answers because what's in it for them is primarily higher cost and greater risk. And in both states, safer and more cost-efficient energy sources are available. Prepare Big Risk Better Alternatives examines the proposed Levy nuclear power plants near Gainesville and Ocala, Florida, and a proposed expansion of the Alvin Vault nuclear plant in Burke County, Georgia. The two projects are flawed in broadly similar ways. The nuclear industry has a long history of cost overruns and construction delays. This reactor project in Flamanville, France is already 4 years behind schedule and $3.7 billion over budget. Both projects intend to use the Westinghouse AP1000 reactor, a new design approved by the NRC in December 2011, which has not yet been completed and brought online anywhere in the world to date. Nuclear power construction has always been subject to major cost increase and regulatory delays. Adding a new reactor technology to the process is unlikely to make it go more smoothly or cheaply. Cost projections for the Levi plant have risen from $3.5 billion to $22.5 billion just in 5 years. In 5 years since the initial estimate. Analysts find that the cost will probably be between $22.5 billion and $29.3 billion. All this money they getting, and they don't even have to finish it. It's still pocketed, making money off of failure, cause that's all it's doing. But the only thing it ain't failing to doing is contaminating everything. In the case of VAR expansion, the utility Georgia Power has not included cost and schedule data in the information it has made public, an omission that ought to make ratepayers nervous, given that the first two reactors built at the site exceeded their original cost projection by a whooping 1,200%. Crazy. All this uncertainty about cost and scheduling amounts to considerable financial risk that will be borne primarily by the public and not the utility companies. In both Georgia and Florida, state laws allow the utility companies to pass on construction and pre-construction costs for nuclear power plants to ratepayers, thus efficiently providing the utility with an interest-free loan from its customers, a loan that need never be repaid even if the project is never completed. Just giving taxpayers' monies away for nothing and killing them with it. That's crazy. Like kill somebody with their own money. In the case of the VAR plant expansion, it's not only the utility ratepayers that are bearing the financial burdens of the project. All U.S. taxpayers will be on the hook thanks to billions of dollars in federal loan guarantees necessary because nuclear power construction is far too risky to attract private financing, as well as hundreds of millions in federal tax production credits. Crazy. So get it from you. Get it from taxpayers. That's crazy. Well, before we get into our second phase of information, I want to take you into this quick video trailer.
All of the good we did, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that to them, justice was done. See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
No, Chernobyl is on fire. And every atom of uranium is like a bullet, penetrating everything in its path. Metal, concrete, flesh. Now, Chernobyl holds over 3 trillion of these bullets. Some of them will not stop firing for 50,000 years.
Tell me how to put it out.
You are dealing with something that has never occurred on this planet before.
Cut the phone lines. Contain the spread of misinformation.
What will happen to our boys?
The pain is unimaginable. In 3 days to 3 weeks, you're dead.
You can see him, and you cannot touch him. Do you understand?
What happened on the night of the accident?
Asking the right question will get you the truth. There is no truth.
What happened there? What happened after? All of it. All of it. Madness.
Diving right in here on Science Direct, because we gonna see just how familiar these situations are entwined with each other. And it reads, radioactive contamination of the soils of Georgia. After 29 to 30 years from the Chernobyl atomic plant incident, the main soil types of Georgia have been examined of contamination present of 137 SCS and 90 SR. From the main types of radioactivity of soils, the biggest threat comes from the artificial radioactivity. Sources of radioactive contamination of soils are different. This includes global deposition of radionuclides, resulting from testing of nuclear weapons, radiation breakdowns, incidents, and peace nuclear expansion. Radioactive elements are easily accumulating in agriculture products. Radioactive contamination of soils in a dependent type of contamination, lowering quality of agriculture products. Especially dangerous in biological relations are anthropogenetic radionuclides. And in first place of 90 SR, T and a half equals 28.79 years of 137 CS. Like Georgia, also Australia was contaminated after Chernobyl accident, whereby radionuclides show very small speed of migration in a few millimeters per year and accumulate in upper parts of soil, transforming them into important source of radioactive elements for plants. It is also interesting to use 137 CS for evaluation of modern agrogenetic transformation of soil layers in Chernobyl contamination region. In addition of the above ability of using spiral distribution stocks of radioactive isotopes 137 CS for assessment of agrogenetic transformation of soil layers on territories with high levels of Chernobyl contamination. The main basic requirements of these methodological have been examined for a particular region. The best results are measuring radionuclide supplies in soils for estimated statistic values of primordiality of 137 CS were in combination of field and laboratory methodology. Interest to radioactive contamination of soil started to form in the 60s and 70s of the last century and significantly increased after Chernobyl incident in 1986. Now, radioactive contamination of soils in a spike-independent type of degradation that is leading to lowering of productivity of soil. In science literature, it is described natural radioactivity of soils indicated the main source of radionuclides on soil surface that of radioactive contamination of soil plant covers of the planet is being evaluated from two positions. Using of anthropogenetic sanctuary hygienic principle when we are considering levels of radiation contamination and of agricultural products and a correspondence content of radionuclide, it is radiological at its radiological standards. Crazy, man. Which brings me to Faith and South report. Details: rise in radiation pollution, cancer death near Georgia nuclear plant. And it states Georgia Power and Southern Nuclear have proposed adding 2 new reactors to the existing 2 at the Alvin nuclear power plant on the Savannah River near Waynesboro, Georgia. But environmental health advocates warn that the plan could worsen existing radiation pollution from the facility, as well as possible related public health problems. A new report written by Joseph Mangano of the nonprofit Radiation and Public Health Project and released by the North Carolina-based Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League has documented a significant rise in radioactivity levels in drinking water and river water and sediments at or downstream from the Vog plant. From 1987 to 1990, when the plant began operating into 1991 to 2003, during full operation, beta radiation rose by 37.1% in raw drinking water and 17.8% in treated drinking water. Oh my God. In the sediment, radioactive beryllium-7 increased by 39.5%, and cesium-137 by 37.4%. And in the river water, levels of tritium, a radioactive isotope of hydrogen, increased by 44.6% of the isotope of hydrogen, which is bad for inhaling high levels of. During that same period, the national cancer death rate for children and adolescents declined by 14.1%. But in Georgia, Berks County, where the plant is located, the death rate for all cancer rose sharply, especially for young people. For Berks residents ages 0 to 24 years, the cancer death rate rose by 55.5%, while for residents aged 25 to 54, it rose by 55.1%, the report states. The findings suggest that some factor introduced since the 1980s has raised cancer risk in the area, particularly in Berks County, because radioactive chemicals are known to cause cancer. The startup of VAR 1 and 2 should be considered as one contributing factor. Lou Zeller, Berta's Clean Air Campaign coordinator, received a rebuttal from Georgia Power that accuses Magano of resorting to a scare tactic, even while acknowledging company officials have not had an opportunity to review the study in detail. It continues. Both Georgia Power and Southern Nuclear Operation Company are confident that Plant Bagal is operated safely and does not pose a health risk to the people living in the vicinity of the plant. The NRC's licensing requirements ensure that the two additional units will not pose a risk to public health and safety. Like that's supposed to mean something. So how then do you account for the rise in radiation pollution and cancer deaths in the area since the plant began operating? The company's rebuttal offers no alternative explanation, like always. Should have already expected that. Should have already expected that. Sorry about that. And that leads me here to Marshable.com. What a troubled power plant tell us about the future nuclear energy in the U.S. America's reliance on nuclear power has steadily increased from 11% to 30% of the country's electrical power output since the 1970s. However, 3 decades have gone by without a successful attempt to build any modern reactors, a factor that threatens the country's position as world's largest producer of nuclear power. And that matters in the battle against global warming, according to some opponents of nuclear energy. If the U.S. pulls back even more on nuclear power, it's possible that the efforts to curb climate change could fall flat. We need all renewable technologies. If the U.S. lost nuclear, it would be a global loss in the fight to mitigate against climate change. nuclear engineer Todd Allen said in an interview. Nuclear power, unlike most things in the U.S., is at a talking point that both sides of the political spectrum campaign, even though members of the public are less enthusiastic about it. Polls show Republicans and Democratic senators alike supporting and expanding nuclear power, and even President Donald Trump has stated his support for it of $3.7 billion, which he closed down the government to get money from the wall like they don't have funds for it. They all BS. So why then, with all this federal support, is nuclear in the United States an endangered energy source? The answer might lie in Georgia. Between 2006 and 2008, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved the construction of 4 brand new nuclear reactors. The plan was to add 2 reactors each of the Alvin Vanguard plant in Waynesboro, Georgia, and the Vergrill Summers in Jencksonville, South Carolina. The project was supposed to be America's attempt to build a brand new style of advanced nuclear power reactors called the AP-1000, the first of which was successfully built by China at the end of September 2018. Instead, the project has become a stain on the country's otherwise outstanding reputation in nuclear energy, and that may never come out. In July 2017, the South Carolina project failed. Project owner Scanner and Santee Cooper realized how behind schedule the project was and efficiently tossed out the $16 billion investment, scrapping the power plant and triggering an FBI investigation in the process. Georgia's plant VAR is now faring much better. Investigators thought the Georgia Public Service Commission, which oversees telecommunications, electric, and natural gas services, revealed that Georgia Power claimed that 60% of Plant VAR was complete when the project was truly only 36% complete, nearly a decade into construction. Plant VAR is also $13 billion over the proposed budget, bringing the project price tag to a startling $27 billion and counting. Early on in Georgia investigation, Chairman Stan Wise admitted that abandoning the project was on the table, saying in a statement that it is possible that the Plant VAR just doesn't get finished at all, and they still profiting off of it, regardless. Opponents of nuclear power have long held that the power source is too expensive and takes too much time. In the case of Vanguard and Summer, that seems to be true. You can't ignore the time and cost it takes to develop a nuclear power reactor design. There's no cheap and dirty way to build nuclear power. Physicist, the nuclear expert Edwin Lemon, said in an interview. He and his colleagues at the Union of Concerned Scientists have become some of the leading skeptics of nuclear energy expansion. Why? Why the Union of Concerned Scientists skeptic? Why the Union of Scientists is skeptic? Because they know it's polluting the place and causing death. There are a lot of people out there saying we need nuclear power to mitigate climate change, but we already in such a deep hole with carbon emissions that what it would take to avert a 2-degree increase. You've got to say we're not going to get there by building nuclear plants, Lemon said. How are you going to build 1,000 reactors around the world in the next 20 years, Lemon asked. And we might not even have much time. A report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, estimates that we have less than 20 years to avert the worst effects from climate change. According to the report, carbon pollution will have to be cut by 45% by 2030 to keep the planet from warming 2 degrees Celsius, a temperature that scientists warned will devastate ecosystem. Electricity production accounts for the largest portion of carbon pollution at 32% in the United States. In the theory, nuclear energy expansion is one of the best options to reduce carbon emissions since it releases almost no CO2. In practice, it's more complex. When it comes to big power plant projects, at least in the United States, there has been public support since consumers pay for a portion of the project cost, but Americans do not have the stomach for anything nuclear near their home, even if it's the safest form of energy production. So even just the littlest form of it is not good to be inhaling all those years. Adding more time and more money to the project that has teetering public support is dangerous. Georgians may not have the stomach for another 10 years of construction. And if the plant isn't finished, the public will certainly turn against undertaking any more project of this magnitude. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution and local news source has found that residents are already starting to turn their back because it's unhealthy and it's not safe at all. But do they care? No, not at all. But it's up to the people to stand up and fight for their rights, because that is got to be illegal. Affecting the water, the food, that's really insane. Really insane. Which lead me right over here to AJC.com. After wrangling over Georgia nuclear plant, cost concerns remain. Not many people can name the plant that their electricity comes from. But in Jefferson, at a gathering sponsored by Jackson EMC, plenty of customers were familiar with the trials and tribulations of the expanding plant Vagar. Among the people who gathered annually for chicken dinner, gospel music, and raffle drawing put on their electric cooperative, there are worries about the mountain headaches 130 miles away. Plant Vob, the only nuclear plant under construction in the United States, keeps ending up in the news because of its ever escalating price tag, and those soaring costs are likely to end up in the monthly bill of customers of Jackson EMC and most of Georgia utilities, which are on the hook to pay for the project. Lie. The ratepayers and the taxpayers. I don't understand why they don't figure out what it's going to cost. Said a retired phone company worker who lives in the commerce and get power from Jackson EMC. I want them to hurry up and finish and quit spending money on it. They ain't the money. What about the lies that it's causing the people over there? You can always make more money. You can't make more lies. You cannot make more lies. which brings you right over here to the thinkprogress.org, and it states, resident in contaminated Georgia town call for more oversight of new nuclear power plant. And this was about 10 months ago. You can be forgiven for taking a jigger counter on visit to Shell Buff, Georgia. The town lies just across the Savannah River of nuclear weapons facility and just down the road from an aging nuclear power plant. The river is one of the most toxic waterways in the country. The weapons facility is one of the most contaminated places on the planet, and the power plant is about to double in size. Locals are outraged. Would be too. We believe that Plant Vigor is going to accelerate the existing contamination that's already in the area and making things worse, said Lindsay Harper, Deputy Director of Georgia WAND, a woman-led advocacy group working to end nuclear proliferation and pollution. We believe that more money should be put towards cleaning up the contamination instead of continuing to produce more. I agree too. I definitely agree. Because that's a real hazard issue. Real hazard issue. Organizers from Georgia WAND and other advocacy groups gathered in Atlanta Saturday to discuss Plant Vigor and related environmental issues and their registered voters. The town hall marked the first stop on a bus tour organized by environmental leaders from across the South. The Freedom to Breathe tour will highlight environmental hazards facing marginalized communities, starting with the expansion of Plant Vigor, the only nuclear project under construction in the country. In 2009, Southern Company began building 2 reactors which are expected to go online in 2021 and 2022, respectively. The expansion has sparked fears of contamination in what already a heavily polluted area, leading advocates to call for more testing. We need independent monitoring in the area that can help us to paint a larger, broader picture of what's actually going on. For real. Harper said, we need more information. We need more money for information. Both the power plant and the weapons facility across the river produce a radioactive form of hydrogen called tritium. That has been intensively linked to Down syndrome in infants. Monitoring has found elevated levels of tritium in the groundwater near Plant Vigor, too little to threaten public health, officials said, but enough to raise eyebrows. I bet. Locals are also worried that the pollution from the plant may be causing cancer. Epidemiologist Joseph Magano found evidence at an uptick in the infant mortality and cancer deaths in Burke County, seat of Plant Vigor. After the facility went online in 1987, it is unclear if the power plant has responsible for the increase. Research has shown that children exposed to radiation are most susceptible to cancer, leukemia in particular, but it is unclear if nuclear power plants produce enough radiation to threaten public health. Studies in Germany and France found that rates of childhood leukemia was significantly higher near power plants. So don't go there with that. They know that. And a study in the United States found that nuclear plant closures were followed by a decline in childhood cancer. However, similar studies, include one undertaken by the National Cancer Institute, found no evidence of a link to settle the matter. The federal government undertook a multi-year study on nuclear power and cancer in 2010, but it prematurely halted that effect in 2017 because they was never trying to find a solution for it because they already know the solution. They already know what they're doing. adding to the uncertainty that the federal government stopped paying the monitoring of the contamination near Plant Val in 2003, believing the power plant posed little risk to allay public concern about the radiation. The government is funding an outreach effort to reassure residents that the facilities are harmless, but locals remain unconvinced. Advocates want more rigorous testing and continued research into the risk of exposure to even low levels of radioactive waste. Notably, Southern Company conducts regular testing, which it submits to regulatory operations of the U.S. nuclear plant and oversees by the government daily to ensure compliance with strict environmental safety. Yeah, right. Standards set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and enforced by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, said John Kraft, a, a spokesman of Georgia's Power and subsidiary of Southern Company. Which he don't care either. He with them. Locals, however, remain skeptical. People just don't trust that whoever is coming into their community has their community's best interests at heart, said Becky Rafter, executive director of Georgia's WAND. She said that community members have long felt exploited, that the independent monitoring is needed to rebuild trust. They have seen their neighbors and other people lose their lives because of Plant Val, said Rafter, adding that black farmers were more likely to be targeted at the weapons facility. She said black men were given the dirtier job. They weren't allowed to wash their clothes on site, so they would take them home and wash them, and the whole family would get sick. That is ridiculous. Even if though testing finds regular operation of the plant poses no threat to human health and is always a possibility of meltdown, notably nuclear power plants are most at risk of failure at the beginning and end of their operating life. Plant Vanguard will be adding 2 nuclear reactors as its existing reactor approaches their twilight years, up in risk of failure. For real. Construction on the plant began in 1976, just a few years before the meltdown. 3 Mile Island dealt a grievous blow to the nuclear sector. Widespread fears about nuclear power pose a serious challenge to the industry already struggling with high costs and meager demand. It would be decades before regulators would approve the construction of nuclear power plants, not until 2012 when officials signed off on the expansion of the plant valve. Southern Company undertook the project with the help of billions in federal loan guarantees promising to deliver affordable nuclear power, but it has struggled to keep down costs. People around the state are paying for Plant Vault every month on their bill, Harper said. You are a federal taxpayer. You are also paying for Plant Vault. The turmoil around Plant Vault has also come as a disappointment to those who believe that nuclear power is vital to the fight against climate change. Unlike coal and natural gas, nuclear plants produce no carbon polluted, and unlike solar panels and wind turbines, they generate electricity on demand. So, however, believe that nuclear is simply too costly and have called for more investment in batteries that can store power generated by solar and wind for when it's needed. This is the outcome that locals are hoping for. Many Burke County residents are employed by Plant Val, but they would rather work in wind or solar. People are having to choose between feeding their families and taking a job that may contaminate their body, Harper said, referring both to power plant and the weapons facility. We want to put our money towards civilians and people, clean economies, and clean, sustainable jobs. But do they care about that? No, not at all. They always been against the people. Now, over here on scallywagmagazines.org, you have the 29 billion nuclear bundugal that's poisoning black communities. As a member of Congress clamored last month to pass a spending bill and avoid a second federal government shutdown, much of the public dialogue revolved more around the standoff between the Republicans and the Democrats than the content of the bill. But for residents of Shell Bluff, a majority black rural community on Georgia's eastern border, the outcomes are clear, and they are dire. Among the bill's many provisions is a measure to extend a tax credit program that was previously set to expire. The program was allocated $800 million to prop up a nuclear power boondoggle that has been plaguing Shell's Bluff and surrounding areas for years. Situated in Burke County on the Savannah River, which forms the Georgia-South Carolina border, Shell Bluff is home to the Alvin Vogue electricity generating plant, commonly known as Plant Vogue, owned largely by Georgia Power, a subsidiary of Southern Company. Plant Vogue has supplied the state with electricity generated by 2 nuclear reactors since the 1980s. The Savannah River site and Plant Vogue on opposed sides of the Savannah River cause radioactive contamination and contribute to high cancer rates in the area. In 2009, Georgia Public Service Commission, PSC, approved plans to construct 2 additional reactors at the plant and allowed Georgia Power to charge ratepayers up front for construction costs. In so doing, the PSC ignored devastating health and environmental effects that nuclear plants had wrought. In the years following, the PSC would also turn a blind eye to massive cost overruns and construction delays, green-lighting the project to continue in spite of the numerous red flags. People in Burke County have constantly fought to stop the nuclear expansion, which stands to shape the future of nuclear energy nationwide, because it's the first such expansion to be approved since 1978. Last year, it seemed that opponents to nuclear expansion were near victory when the contractor responsible for the building the new reactor went bankrupt. But in December, the PSC voted to let Georgia Power continue the project. If Congress extended the tax credit program, even though it would mean an ultimate price tag of $29 billion compared to the original $14 billion estimate. Now that Georgia's congressional delegation had delivered the tax credit, the project seems to be back on track. It's just money for Georgia Power, Elizabeth Burns, a longtime resident of Shell Bluff, told Scalawag. They are not thinking about the lives of the people around these nuclear plants. With the 2018 midterm election approaching, the next battle over Plant Vogue may lie in the race to fulfill 2 seats on the 5-person all-Republican PSC. The health and sustainability of Shell Bluff and other communities in Georgia's Black Belt region hang in the balance. Environmental degradation has afflicted the area around Burke County since the 1950s, when the United States government acquired about 300 square miles of property on the South Carolina side of the Savannah River. The government forced an entire town to relocate. In its place, the Department of Energy commissioned the chemical company DuPont to build a facility known as the Savannah River site to produce tritium and plutonium, 2 radioactive ingredients used in nuclear weapons. In the early 1980s, William Lawlessness, a Department of Energy engineer stationed at the Savannah River site, blew the whistle on DuPont's dangerous waste disposal practices. Lawlessness exposed how, for decades, the company buried radioactive materials in cardboard boxes and shallow trenches, which they leaked into surface water and were absorbed into the soil, contaminating groundwater. Besides polluting the water, animals were also contaminated. A radioactive turtle was found nearly a mile away from the plant at a commercial hog farm. Radioactive isothes can enter the human body through food chain, eventually causing cancer. In the decades following construction of the Savannah Riverside, cancer rates in the surrounding country began to rise. May Della Scott II, an elder who grew up in Burke County, remember a time when folks only went to a doctor for a broken bone, and most everything else was healed with the medicine plant that once grew wild in the area. But this disappeared as pollution changed the ecosystem. We had everything we needed right here: blackberry vines, grape, plum trees, milkweed, everything grew wild and plentiful, she said, but it don't grow here no more. The Savannah Riverside not only put communities at risk for long-term health and environmental problems, the nuclear plant also posed a constant threat of fatal disasters. Several years after lawlessness came forth about DuPont carelessness, a congressional investigation revealed that the plant had a hidden track record of narrowly averted meltdowns that almost caused destruction, on par with these disasters like those of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. Despite the dangers and devastating effects of the Savannah Riverside, which will eventually decommission its 5 nuclear reactors, Georgia Power got approved to build a nuclear plant to generate electricity just across the river in Burke County. In 1974, construction began on Plant Vaugar right outside the unincorporated community on Shell Bluff. As Georgia Power bought land for the Plant Vaugar complex, black landowners in Shell Bluff faced a dilemma. Claude Howard, a lifelong resident of Shell Bluff, told Scalawag that in 1919 his grandfather bought over 600 acres to pass to his children so they wouldn't be under the foot of the white man. But by the 1980s, a few members of the Howard family were struggling financially and wanted to sell 300 acres. Other family members disagreed. Claude Howard's sister, Annie Laura Howard Stevens, said Georgia Power took advantage of the rifle to acquire the land. It was divided and conquered, she said. Despite a lawsuit some family members waged to prevent the scare, it went through in 1985. By 1989, Plant Vaugar was fully operational, years behind schedule and 1,200% over budget. Since then, conditions have worsened in Shell Bluff. We noticed that lots of folks started coming down with cancer, Stevens said. My daddy, mama, sister, 2 brothers died of cancer, and another living brother now has cancer. My auntie, a cousin, and other folks down on the river died of cancer as well. A study commissioned by the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League showed that between 1987 and 2003, the cancer death rate in Burke County increased by 25%, while national average declined by 4%. For black people in Burke County, the cancer spike was higher with a 30% increase. The study author, epidemiologist Joseph Mangano, attributed the rising cancer rates at the heightened levels of airborne radioactivity and radioactivity levels in drinking water, river water, and sediment. Vaugar has contributed to the Savannah River becoming the 3rd most polluted river in the country. Its reactors use 75 billion gallons of water from the Savannah River each day to cool radioactive fuel rods. Many Shell Bluff residents have reported finding sores on fish from the river, which no one eats anymore. Plant Vaugar sucks up all that nasty polluted water every day and then thermonuclearizes it, and then returns 1/3 of that super hot water back into the river, explained Becky Rafter, executive director of Georgia's Women Action for the New Direction, GAWAND. The other 2/3 goes out to the cooling towers and evaporates out over the community, she said. GAWAND, based in Atlanta, has worked closely with Shell Bluff residents for years to mitigate damage from the plant and oppose expansion. GAWAND superhead a campaign to attain federal money for monitoring radioactivity pollution after the Georgia Department of Natural Resource Environmental Protection Division, EPD, discontinued monitoring. The agency last tested for radiation in 2003 and found radioactivity isotopes in the air, soil, vegetation, animals, crops, groundwater, river water, and drinking water in numerous countries around Vagar and the Savannah River site. After 2003, the monitoring ended with no explanation because they don't care. In 2006, Georgia Power applied for a permit to build the 2 additional nuclear reactors at Plant Vagar. Both the Georgia Public Service Commission and the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved the project in 2009 without caring about the environmental health issues and risks. It was until 2016 that the U.S. Department of Energy agreed to fund a 3-year nuclear contamination monitoring program housed at the University of Georgia. Bubby Paul, who headed GAWAND before Raptor and lobbied for monitoring between 2003 and 2013, said that for all those years, officials passed her from one agency to another with empty promises. They were basically trying to get us to quit, she said. Ignoring all the problems caused by Plant Vagar, the federal government in 2010 gave Southern Company $8.3 billion in loan guarantees to start construction on the new reactor. The company further avoided paying for its own project by pushing a bill through the Georgia legislature to make ratepayers cover the cost. This rankled not only progressive and those who opposed the expansion, but also Tea Partiers and also other conservatives who saw the move as an upfront to the free market. In the 16 years Plant Vagar began operating, the cancer death rate in Burke County spiked 25%. Compared to a 4% decline nationwide. The cancer death rate for black people in Burke County increased 30%. Georgia Power contracted with a company called Westinghouse to complete the expansion, but complications quickly surfaced. PSC staff warned commissioners about design problems, parts not made to quality standard, key jobs not completed on time, and other issues that led to construction delays and cost overrun. Meanwhile, numerous advocacy groups intervened at public hearings to add pressure to these warnings and to try to convince commissioners that transitioning to solar power would be quicker, cheaper, and safer. Even the contractor Westinghouse had doubts. It produced an internal memo in 2011 indicating that the companies didn't have the staff structure or experience to adequately manage the project. Georgia Power obtained the memo in 2014 but didn't halt the expansion. The memo proved prophetic in March of last year when the Westinghouse filed for bankruptcy that stalled the VAR expansion until December, when the PSC scheduled a vote to determine the fate of the project. By that time, the Department of Energy had committed an additional $3.7 billion in loan guarantees, but PSC staff urged commissioners to kill the project or make Georgia Power absorb some of the balance of the ballooning cost. Assuming the project is completed, ratepayers will incur significantly higher revenue requirements and a reduced economic benefits, while the company's profit will increase. They asserted in a document filed with the PSC in early December. Despite their own staff members' recommendation to pull the plug on Vagar, the PSC ruled that the project could continue if Congress approved $800 million in tax credit to prop it up. Georgia Senator Johnny Ickerson, whose third largest donor in Southern Company, managed to work the tax credit into budget agreements that averted a federal government shutdown last month. The Savannah River has become the third most polluted in the country due to the contamination from the Savannah River site, Plant Vagar. Shortly thereafter, 3 organizations opposed to the expansion appealed the PSC decision, saying that it rushed the ruling at the beheadings of Georgia Power. At the same future of Plant Vagar is contested, the PSC elections loom large. Commissioner Stan Wise announced last October that he would not seek re-election, opting instead of seeking a job in the energy industry, which he effectively been working for all along. Instead of finishing his term, he resigned in January, presumably to give Republican Governor Nathan Deal time to appoint a replacement who will have an enormous advantage in the election. After stepping down, Wise told a local Atlanta radio station, "I would bet my house the Vagar expansion being completed according to the latest timeable and cost estimate." Former Democratic State Senator Doug Stoner is running to replace Wise. 2 Democrats, John Noah and Litney Miller, have entered the race for the other PSC seated that will be up for grabs in the midterm election. Noah, a former state representative who funded a Newbie energy company, has taken a definitely critical stand of the PSC, saying in a press state release, "The people of Georgia are fed up with the long stream of rationalization and broken promises about Vagar. The relationship between the PSC and the utility is just too cozy." For real. In Shell Bluff, members of the Howard family continued fighting in the Plant Vagar expansion. In 2010, they joined with other community members to fund concerned citizens of Shell Bluff, which has become a driving force for the environmental justice in the area. Bernice Johnson Howard, a Shell Bluff resident who worked as a GAWAND field coordinator, told Scalawag that the nuclear development is dangerously short-sighted. When the water is no longer fit to drink, the air is too polluted to breathe, the vegetation starts to brown, you can't eat, drink, or breathe your money, she said. And that's true. Because everything polluted, you ain't got nothing to eat. And then it's hard to, and then you can't grow either. It's gonna be stopped in feminized position. And nobody want to be in that kind of position where they can't feed their family because everything is polluted due to the government, and they won't do nothing about it or even help you out or even have in regard about the problem to fix it. But this is what they do. They don't care. Which puts me at GeorgiaWatch.org. And it's the health environmental harms ignored at Plant Vagar VCM 18 hearings. Atlanta at the 18th semi-annual Vagar Construction Monitoring VCM proceedings, Georgia Power hand is out again to request approval from the Georgia Public Service Commission PSC for $448 million invested in the construction of the 2 new nuclear power reactors, Unit 3 and Unit 4, between July 1st, 2017 through December 31st, 2017. Advocates and commissioners alike focus on financial issues involving Vagar, once again ignoring the health and environmental issues. I have a problem with Georgia Power profiting off of failure, since they are started their profit margin and has doubled since they started their profit margin it has doubled. So the longer they go and the more money they spend, the more money they make, Debbie Dooley, co-founder of Atlanta Tea Party, testified. Georgia Power and Southern Company has not managed the plant in a fiscally responsible way. There were problems that they knew about a year before Westinghouse went bankrupt, Dooley said. Georgia's ratepayers have shelled out over $2 billion on the nuclear construction cost recovery fees on their utility bills, while Georgia Power's net profits have soared to the giddy 17% margin this year. Meanwhile, U.S. Department of Energy (DOE) plans to give the project an additional loan of $1.67 billion by July 1st, 2018. They received an $8.3 billion in guarantee loan from the federal government at the start of this banduga. It's out of control. It has been more than 32 years since the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster, which sent radiation around the world that has expected to increase incidence of cancer in the population for thousands of years. The Soviet scientist Alexei Yablov concluded that 1 million premature deaths have already resulted from Chernobyl. Fukushima's 3 nuclear meltdowns are still leaking radiation into the Pacific Ocean and contaminating the food chain, water, soil, animal, plants, and people, causing sickness and early death for generations. You see this? It is crazy. However, a previously report by Atlanta Progressive News in 2008, nuclear power doesn't require a major incident or meltdown to cause damage to the health of the people or the environment. It don't. In Burke County, Georgia, environmental samples contain tritium, cesium-137, strontium-90, plutonium, iodine-129, cobalt-60, according to a recent report by Georgia WAND on community impact at crossroads of nuclear and climate injustice in the U.S. South. On each of these radioactive isotopes, tritium is the element contributing the highest level of contamination, showing up in air, rain, groundwater, river water, drinking water, fish, milk, crops, leafy vegetation, and deer. All nuclear power plants routinely release doses of tritium, which can cause birth defects and cancer. Joseph Magano, an epidemiologist and Statelize, conducted a report based on publicly available data on annual deaths between 1979 and 2003, obtained from the National Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the National Cancer Institute. This report states that the cancer death rate for children have adolescents in the 11 countries close to Vagar and the Savannah River site rose 58.5% compared to a 14.1% decline nationally. Cancer rate rose sharply for all cancer in Burke County, while U.S. rates have declined. CNN News also aired a report from Shell Bluff in Burke County discussing how cancer rates in that area are 51% higher than the national average. CNN News reported that something going wrong over there. And it's crazy what they're doing, affecting the people of these communities. That is really insane. Well, that leads me to my last report here on Snoops.com. And it states, U.S. government ships radioactive milk to black communities as part of a genocide plot. African American adults do have higher rates of diabetes than the general population. The Center of Disease Control Prevention estimates that the prevalence of diabetes is 9.4% among American adults overall, but 12.7% among black American adults. Although the increased risk for type 2 diabetes among non-Latino black men and women is well known and documented, complete explanations for relationships are lacking. Scientists agree that both biological and socioeconomic factors are likely at play. One partial explanation is that men and women of African descent appear to differ from other ethnics in the ways in which their bodies metabolize glucose and regulate its level, according to a 2012 report. So they actually study our bodies and notice that we have different, our body breakdown, our metabolism breakdown glucose different than others. So they actually studying. Scientists have considered a number of social factors to explain the difference as well, such as access to health care, availability of healthy foods, household status, and others, as 2015 study conducted by researchers with National Minority Quorum Forum described on their website as a research and educational organization dedicated to ensuring that high-risk racial and ethnic population and community receive optimal health care, noted that although numerous adverse health factors may apply to everyone living in America's poorest neighborhood, regardless of one's ethnicity, black Americans are more likely to reside in such areas. Among black adults aged 45 years at baseline, residents is in the most diverse neighborhood, deprived neighborhood, significantly increased odds of obesity, high blood pressure, lower HDL cholesterol, elevated fasting glucose, and markers of inflammation. White adults living in these neighborhoods also had increased likelihood of several cardiometabolic risk factors. However, blacks were roughly 4 times more likely to live in the most disadvantaged neighborhood than white. This is crazy what they're doing to our community. This is actually going on in the background at the same time while they're declaring that, oh, it was a warning, and it's not, because if it was a warning, it could have stated anything else. It could have said, this is a test, please disregard, nothing to worry about. It could have said that, but instead it said a radiological hazard warning, which is actually going on in the background. That advocates and researchers and journalists and everybody around those areas been reporting on this for years, while they still killing the people, giving them cancer and everything else that they want to. It's not a test. This is actually going on. This is actually going on. Do research around the areas that you live in around these plants, because the same thing happened in Chernobyl is the same thing that's going on in Georgia, because Georgia had one of the most biggest nuclear plant farms in the country. And I'm pretty sure Chernobyl did too. So this is actually going on in the background. It's not a hazard, a test, because it's actually going on. They just don't want the people to find out because they want to continue to kill you off. It's a genocide. And plus everything to help win the elections for Trump. And Trump is supporting this, so you already know Trump already know what's going down and all the concerns and stuff that people are bringing up. If he's putting money into it, if you're going to put your money into it, why not know about it, what's going on with it? And I'm pretty sure he knows it all. And don't care. But that is my report for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. And you already know, if you like the information that I shared, like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell and stay tuned weekly for weekly report for real facts.